Welcome back to another episode of Just
Just
a
a
Squirrel
squirrel
looking
looking
for a
for a
nut,
nut,
trying
trying
to
to
get
get
out of
out of
this
this
rut.
rut. We did it almost flawlessly and with shirts that completely match some of the lettering. What a
Yeah,
beautiful thing that is. Oleg, you got a haircut.
I know. I was just thinking about that, Scott. It's been a while since you and I have been on the show together. A couple weeks,
Yeah, I was thinking, who
right?
is this person suddenly on the
Yeah.
screen with me? The other official founding squirrel. We are back together again. Unfortunately, our co hosts, Brian and Chris, had an emergency tonight, so they won't be here. We miss
Mm,
them, but they want to be back, and they will be back next month, and I'm looking forward to that. Oleg, greetings
mm.
from New York City, and you are still in
In
Africa. Is that,
Ghana.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Now, you are in a part of the world that does not have the same level of access to communication that those
Mm,
in more developed countries might have. And so
yeah.
the question I have for you is, what are you learning as you travel in that society about how people can make sure that their voice is heard when, relatively speaking, compared to the rest of the world, they, and certainly when it comes to things like international policy and the ability to dominate global affairs, a lot of these folks and the country itself may not be able to have its voice heard.
Yeah. Well, I think the first observation that first thing that I've observed is that in countries like this, and I have to be careful what I say because I'm still here, so I'm still abiding by the laws of the nation here. But
Mhm.
I think the thing that I'm learning is one, technology is available here. It's just limited bandwidth when it comes to it. So
Mhm.
people do have access to phones and computers and the basic things that you and I have access to. Obviously, the cost or there's a pay to play model when it comes to this. So you have to pay for the data usage compared to when you're in US. You could go into the McDonald's or library or
Mhm.
whatever it is and get free Wi-Fi that is probably exponentially higher bandwidth
Mhm.
than the ones that people pay for here. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. The other thing that I'm learning is, especially when it comes to Africa compared to Europe, because it is still in the earlier stages of development, not everyone can afford access. Not
Mhm.
everyone can afford connection to the outside world. Not everyone
Mhm.
can afford a laptop. Not everyone can afford an iPhone. Not everyone can afford a data plan or a SIM card, if we're going as low as that, because the wages are a lot lower here for the work that they do. So, in answering this question, how can you make sure your voice is heard on a global scale? I think it's very difficult. I think it's a very difficult path for people who live in different African countries and maybe even European countries. I mean, you were in Athens. Athens, I think it's relatively similar as far as poverty level and everything's concerned. So I think what people do try and do is I think they try to make their voice heard locally. I think that uh, there's something different about, for example, when I arrived in Ghana, one of the immediate differences that I've noticed is that the level of trust that people have in each other and the next door neighbor is, I feel like, significantly higher than it is when I was in the States. And I wonder if the reason why it's like that is because the economy and some of these other things are not as well developed. So when things do get to kind of a low point in your life, you're more likely to turn to your neighbor and ask for help than you are
Mhm.
to a local government or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
So that's why I think the trust is there. So when I think about how can your voice be heard, I think it starts internally. I think it starts with spreading the message internally. Now, is that message going to get to the top? And actually, will the change happen? I don't know. I haven't lived here enough nor experienced the culture to really understand. But based from some of the history books and things like that that I've read, I don't think it is heard most of the time.
Before we move on, I want to say
Mm.
good evening to James Kunkel. Thank you for popping into the show. It is always good to see folks, and be sure to contribute, say anything you want, ask any questions. We want to hear your thoughts. This is a community. It ain't just us talking away here. So we want to hear your input and make sure that you and anyone else who is listening or watching understands that they are a vital part of the conversation. Making your voice heard is interesting that you talk about that, because actually, even in the developed world, a lot of people feel like their voice isn't heard. In the United States, for instance, whether people's voice are heard has been a lot of the reason for social unrest. We know, just as a rule, here we have not engaged in political discussions. My political beliefs probably aren't what many people assume that they are. And Oleg and I don't know what your political beliefs are, Oleg, at least publicly. You've never told me publicly. And so we really do hold to a line on that. We're not making any political statement. However, I do want to say that those who voted in the last election for a certain candidate, not in the last election, the election before the last one, the 2016 election, felt that they voted for this candidate who later became president because, in some part, not universally, there were a host of reasons, I get that, but in some part, some claimed that it was a protest voice or vote because their voice wasn't heard. And in fact, Hillary, some have argued, did not receive the full range of voices or votes, that she might have otherwise received, because those that supported Bernie Sanders felt that the Democratic machine had manipulated the outcome of the primaries so that their voices weren't heard, and so that he was shut out. And that goes as to, even when there are significant portions of the population that have full access, at least allegedly, to the vote, they may not feel that their voice is heard. Another way that comes out in the United States is with regards to a lot of the issues that people have with regards to big companies like Amazon, or even public utilities, that no one is going to be able to oust on their own. Here, Con Edison is the main electricity provider. No individual is going to be able to do. Cable services are like this too, is going to be able to stop them from doing anything.
Yeah.
And so you can, for instance, call up their customer care and complain all you want. I don't know. I don't feel like when I talk to our cable service provider, my voice is heard. They don't care.
Well, I think the other thing that I'm learning, and maybe it might be of value for you and I to even define what does it mean to be heard. So in my opinion, what it means to be heard in a lot of the cultures that I've been a part of is heard equals change. And I think depending on the culture, for example, in US, in my opinion, your voice is heard when change is made. And not gradual change, but more so like immediate change. That's why I think there have been situations where I feel like my voice wasn't heard because instant change wasn't made. So I think that's one of the things that's maybe harder to understand for me, maybe not now, but however many years ago. I didn't fully understand how the whole voting process actually worked. Because I would vote for one candidate, and I mean, we've had this thing even happen. Like, majority of people vote for one, somehow the other one still wins.
Yeah.
And it,
Talk about your voice not being heard.
yeah. So that's where I think I start to have a lot more questions than answers within me. That okay, if I did everything in my power to put X, Y, and Z candidate in a particular position, and the candidate still doesn't end up there, then what does it actually matter? Because clearly the results show that it doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's where I think it's a bit of a challenge to understand how how can one's voice be heard? How can change really happen when you see the results that are completely opposite of that? I also find it interesting with some of these other situations. For example, people who have been speaking up on behalf of climate change, right?
Yeah.
This is a topic that's, I feel like we've had a conversation around for however many years by now. So is their voice being heard because no significant changes being made? Changes are being made, I think, but not on the same scale as some of the other changes that we see. When COVID-19 happened, someone voiced that we should do this. We need to wear masks. We need to go this. Boom. What, 24 hours? 72 hours later? It was implemented across almost every single state.
Yeah.
Within 3 days. 3 days, I was in Austin, Texas. 3 days before that, my office said, hey, it'll be fine. We're just going to go on a brief lockdown. 3 days after that, it was closed. And then weeks after that, everything was closed.
Yeah.
So why are the other efforts not given the same, I don't know, opportunity? That part I don't know. And I guess that's where I get curious in when it comes to people like that who are supporting some of these other efforts. Do they feel like their voice is being heard? And if not, what do you do? What do you do afterwards, I guess? Do you still maintain faith that somehow some things are going to change? And if so, like, what keeps that hope going?
It goes to a conversation we've had on this show before,
Mm,
which is an interesting one, which is about the nature of hope and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing,
mm-hmm,
or somewhere in between, or maybe it's on a sliding scale. In some ways it's good, in some ways it's bad. And that is a fair point. The connection of a voice being heard and hope. I had a boss once who had a very not nice way of dealing with people. He was very screechy and very bossy and dismissive of those that he, for whatever reason, thought were beneath him. And unfortunately, his behaviors were such that even though he had a position of authority within this organization, his voice was not heard.
mm,
And even if people listened to him because they had to, they found ways to not implement his orders, or
mm,
he always ended up a lower priority, or a whole host of other sort of passive ways that people got back at him because of the way he communicated with them. And I'll never forget, he was bossing, and he would never ask, he would demand in a way that was super sharp. And he said, I am sick of sitting here screaming into the wind, which I believe I correctly understood as him feeling when his voice went out, it was like just slamming right back into his face. No one
mm-hmm,
was hearing him. And so there are situations in which one may not have their voice heard. Well, probably most situations in which a voice isn't heard, it's because it's a powerlessness.
mm,
But the question also that's embedded in this, because to me that goes us to your point, climate change
mm,
activists or people that want to change election laws or any other people who are part of a whole host of other causes that never go anywhere. They're probably not having their voices heard because of the relationship between power and their and what it is they're trying to say. If what it is they're trying to say is not aligned with whatever structures facilitate the exertion of power, then their voice isn't going to be heard. But there are some issues like that where it's structural. You're born in the wrong social class. You're born poor. The interests
mm-hmm,
of the poor do not and have historically not garnered a lot of traction in the world.
mm.
On the other hand, the interests of a millionaire, a billionaire losing 10 cents of tax dollars is something, if that happens, oh my God, the whole world has to hear about it.
Yeah.
If on 9/11 is 2 anniversaries. One is of a World Trade Center attack in the United States. Another is a major incident, and I don't remember all the details of it, but I believe it occurred in Chile. The whole world knows about what happened on 9/11 to the United States. Chile, no one gives a
I don't even know
flying.
what happened. What did
Yeah,
happen there?
there was some coup or some, again, like, I don't even know. I was told at one point, and that, by the way, goes as the point. I was told 9/11 is actually an anniversary in our country, whatever this was at the time, when the person told me it was indeed catastrophic. I've forgotten. No one cares except those in
Mm,
Chile. And that goes, again, it's to power. Relative levels of power, the US has it.
mm-hmm.
Chile, I think even they would acknowledge, relative to the US, they're powerless. But
Mm,
the case my boss raises is an interesting one, because when do we have power? When do we not? How can we lose it? And we often talk about power being given up voluntarily because you don't believe in yourself, or because you don't act in a way that encourages people to treat you as a
mm,
powerful person, all that sort of stuff. But in his case, he had, at least positionally and from a salary perspective, power,
yeah.
but he lost his voice because of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it probably goes um, to what degree do you have power. So, in my opinion, I think how do you answer this? I think one always has power. I think, and that's only from my experience. I think I always have power to make a decision. Now, I don't think I always have power to make um, uh, the best pot. I don't know. I don't know if this makes sense. For example, if someone were to come to me and they say, "Hey, I'm struggling financially and I need help," okay,
Mm-hmm.
I might have the power to make a decision to introduce them to someone, but I might not have the power to solve their financial situation.
Yeah.
So I think within that, there are probably multiple layers of power. But I do think that to a degree, one always has the power to make some decision. Now, I don't know if it's that decision that's ultimately going to solve whatever the situation is. I also find it interesting, speaking of this on this whole topic of power. The other thing that it made me think of is popularity. So depending on certain topics, right? Some topics can become popular within a matter of hours. And what's fascinating to me is that depending on the topic and its popularity, it could take away literally the entire world's attention and drive it directly towards that, compared to some of the other topics that we've had conversations about for many, many years beforehand.
Right.
So I wonder, does power also play a role in that? That does power somehow play a role in, I don't know, for example, TikTok becoming a thing, and now everyone, well, not everyone, but many people talk about it, and it seems like the attention or the power, so to speak, has shifted from how do we solve the global crisis when it comes to poverty or climate change or some of these other issues. Now it shifted something that's popular. Now
Mm-hmm.
it's shifted that's something, quote unquote, more people are talking about or more interested in. So does power play a role in that as well? Does power, what is the connection between power and popularity then?
Well, let me personalize this a little bit. Were you popular in high
Yeah.
school?
To a degree. I mean, I don't think I was like the go-to person, but I think I I think the thing that was in my advantage when I was in high school and college is I always made an effort to fit into all groups. So I didn't just subscribe to one group, but I made an effort to become friends with multiple groups.
How
I
did
don't
you do
really
that?
know. I literally just went up to the groups and tried to make friends. I remember from middle school days, I would hang out with one group during lunch break and then during the specific classes. For example, there was one class where we were taught how to use computers and there was a little bit of a focus on photography, I would sit next to a completely different group of kids
Mm.
and I would strike conversations with them. And these were the kids that were considered to be, what's the right word? Um, Not the ones that you would engage, not kids who were not athletic. So like you would never see
Mhm.
them on the soccer field, and so like, but those are the kids that I would choose to strike conversations with. And I would go and hang out with them after school sometimes from time to time. But that was all due to my efforts. Like I chose to be friends with them, you know?
Why do you think people like to be popular?
Um, I think one of the reasons why people like to be popular is I think being popular helps you fit in faster. I think being popular gives you some status. I think
Mm.
being popular gives you power. It gives you some social power that you don't have if you're alone. And depending on your status within the group, I think it could create the perception that you can do certain things that other people can't do.
Mhm.
If you're leading an organization, one could assume that you could probably solve whatever financial hardship or whatever other form of hardship the person experiences. If you're a janitor of that organization, and this is by no means, there's some janitors that make plenty of money and could
Mhm.
solve
Oh, yes,
serious
they do.
hardships,
Yeah.
but just from a general assumption that I think some people could make, you probably would not go to someone who doesn't have an influence
Mhm.
or perceived influence.
Right.
So that's why, yeah, I think popularity has the same exact role.
Would you rather, do you seek to be popular now in your life?
No, popularity is really, it's not, I wouldn't even say it's top 50 or 100 things that I seek for. I think one of the reasons why I don't seek it anymore, and I don't even think I ever did seek it. I think it kind of it was a byproduct of
Right.
the actions that I chose to take. And I think the reason why I don't seek it at all now is because I've really worked on trying to lose the weight of other people's opinions
Mm.
of me and what I should be doing and what I could be doing differently. And, for me, I feel lighter walking around now and knowing that, yes, I still find value in other people's opinions, but I don't let them dictate my life the same way I used to.
What if you found out that like everyone hated you, or you gradually realized you were becoming a social pariah?
Then I'll probably have to change some things, right? Because I guess going back to your point, if one person says it, it's okay. If 1,000 people say it, then maybe the problem is me.
Do you feel that when other people correct you or tell you that you have a problem, that your voice is being silenced?
It depends on the situation. I think there are some cases where I've been very good at being able to receive feedback like that.
Mhm.
I think a lot of it also has to do with my level of respect for that person. I
Oh, is
think
that
it
why
also
you're
has
always ignoring me when I tell you all the stuff about
yeah,
yourself?
but
Now I know.
I think it also goes back to how well I think the other person understands
Mm.
either that field or me or whatever the
Mhm.
situation is. For example, if you were to come to me and you have no experience in, I don't know, starting a business in some part of Ghana, for example, right?
Yeah,
And I'm
right, which
coming
I
to
have none.
you. Yeah, exactly. So you come to me and you tell me all these things. Hey, you need to do this, you need to do that, but you have no experience. That today it frustrates me a little bit because I think that everyone has a everyone who has an opportunity to speak, I think carries a responsibility
Mhm.
for the things that they speak.
Mhm.
So if you come to me and you say, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that, but you're not coming from any experience, just
Mhm.
coming from hypotheticals, it makes it very challenging for me to receive that feedback. So that's where I feel like I've really learned to not necessarily tell the person you're wrong for saying the things, but more so trying to understand. And I'll ask them this question, like, where does that come from? Do you have experience in this field, to try and get a better insight, like where are they getting this information? So maybe that's in a way saying they're right or wrong, just using different words. But um, as far as the other part of your question, when people say I'm wrong, I can accept it now. Yeah, 5 years ago, I would have had a challenging time to do it. I would have started back and forth. No, you're wrong. I'm wrong. No, you're wrong. Now it's just like I'll admit in situations where I actually could have made a different choice, But I think, I don't know. What do you think contributes to that? Is it maturity? Is it experience? Being able to admit when you're wrong?
I was at a workplace leadership retreat years ago, and they had a social worker come in who I guess did leadership training. And one of the things, and I'll just say, nice man, he wasn't a spring chicken. Okay. In fact, he hadn't been a spring chicken in more than a day or two. Just saying. And as he was giving his presentation, the reason I say this is he said that he has a friend who's about his age, who just doesn't do apologies, or she just doesn't do acknowledgments that she's wrong. He's just like, she just doesn't do that. And so if you want to be her friend, you have to just accept the fact that she's never going to acknowledge that she's wrong, let alone apologize for it. And that's just who she is. And so what he was trying to do was get this leadership team to acknowledge that there's some people, there was one person in this leadership team that did not believe in acknowledging that they were wrong. And we were not going to get them to acknowledge that they were wrong. Although, of course, they were more than happy to point out other people's wrongs. And as much as on one hand, yeah, we can't control other people's behavior. I understand that. On the other hand, social norms, I think, really do dictate, particularly at a certain level of leadership, the ability to acknowledge that one is wrong. I tend to view a refusal to acknowledge oneself as wrong, if they really are. And if it's a consistent basis, if it's someone you've known them 20 years and they've never once been wrong about anything, supposedly, for instance, as opposed to they really think that they're right. And if you were to step back and look at it objectively, there's at a minimum a reason why they believe that they do that's legit. Sometimes there is no legit reason. And in that case, I tend to view it as either, there's a couple of ways you could view it. Sometimes it can be immaturity or insecurity. Sometimes it could be a personality disorder. You're a narcissist, so you're incapable of seeing yourself as wrong. You may, by the way, have intellectual limitations. An interesting thing that I read was that the less intelligent someone is, the less likely they're able to see other viewpoints. And therefore, they are more likely to be confident that their way is right and reject the opinions of others. And so if you are of extraordinarily average experience and cannot even conceive that anyone would think anything different than whatever popped into your little head in that moment, then maybe you are someone that's a conceivable reason for you not being able to say, I'm sorry or I'm wrong. Then another way of dealing with that came up with a book I recently read on Stoicism, in which the Stoics basically would argue that the person, if they really were wrong, but won't acknowledge it, either just has no wisdom or they're ignorant. Either way, they are, or there's some other, deficiency in them, basically. It was like, look at this as a indicator of an internal issue that they have, and view it with compassion. Like, do you really want to be someone without wisdom? Or do you really want to be someone that has some sort of inability to appropriately take responsibility for your actions and respond accordingly? That's
Yeah.
how I personally tend to view it, as one of a number of those things.
Yeah. Do you think, touching back on the point that you made in regard to narcissism, do you think everyone has narcissistic personalities or tendencies?
I believe that they have it within them.
Mm,
Absolutely. I have them with
hmm.
me. I don't apologize
Yeah.
for that. If I didn't, I wouldn't have, I wouldn't want to have my voice heard.
Hmm.
I wouldn't have the confidence to speak. I wouldn't be up here with you every
Mm,
week sitting here thinking that anyone would care about what I have to say, let alone that what I had to say was important enough to be repeated. I've taken risks with my entire career by going down this path. I really have, and financial
yeah.
risks, right? So there must be an element of narcissism within, because otherwise I wouldn't have the ego to believe that that was possible. In
Yeah.
addition, I've rejected the ideas that other people have had about me that have been negative, right? And we've talked about this
Hmm.
before, this idea that has been expressed to me over time that Scott's stupid. Well, obviously, I must have some degree of narcissism because I don't believe it.
Yeah.
And so I think that all healthy people have it. I think that it probably exists on a spectrum. And then there comes a point in which it moves over into disordered behavior. Just like we all have to eat, everyone likes to eat, but there does come a point in which the function of eating can move into a place of disorder.
Hmm. I remember one time, it was like a brief, I don't know, very short relationship I was in. It got to the point where I was asked the question of whether or not I was a narcissist. And I
They
remember
asked you
sitting,
that?
yeah,
They say, "Oh, by the way, oh, like, do you think you're a narcissist?"
true story, almost exactly like that.
Really? Well,
Yeah, and
narcissists aren't supposed allegedly can't recognize it, but that's
and that I
whatever.
remember, and I remember sitting there and really thinking about it. And I looked at the definition of everything, and I think one of the things was inability to take feedback or criticism and
Mhm.
things like that. And I remember looking at most of those things and thinking, well, I think I do actually relatively well when it comes to a lot of these categories. But it got me thinking along what you just described. I think everyone has some sort of degree of narcissism because, I mean, otherwise, even when it comes to the feedback, right? Otherwise, you
Yeah,
wouldn't be able to make the decision to understand which feedback do you take in, which feedback do you not take in,
yeah.
what is not considered feedback, or I mean, maybe everything's feedback, but which ones do you act on, which ones you don't. So I just thought it was a really interesting question to be asked because it got me thinking down a complete different path that I didn't know existed. But
Well, look. Oh, oh,
I
go
will
ahead.
tell you this: when I was asked that question,
Hmm.
and I think this goes to direct attacks. When I feel like attacked, I think it's more difficult for my voice to be heard afterwards.
Why?
I think, especially when it comes to personal attacks, like a question like this, do you feel like you're a narcissist? Because um, how do I put this? I can't help but to think about how did this person actually arrive to this?
Why
What do
are
they
they
see
asking?
within me? Yeah, what do they see within me that I may not be able to see myself?
Yeah. Although,
Right?
how do you know that they
And
were
if
seeing
someone,
anything in you? It might have been them.
exactly, exactly, it might have been themselves, and then you get down the rabbit holes like, well, why is it that no one else has told me that I am? So it's just, yeah, it's a very long path, but yeah, I think that I think confidence also plays a big role in having one's voice be heard, like doing things that you and I have been doing, and so many other people, including James and Jessica and everyone else, like getting onto these platforms and sharing the perspectives. And I mean, let's face it, not every conversation is going to be a masterpiece.
Yeah.
That's a given, right?
Yeah.
Some conversations are going to be equivalent to finger paintings,
Yeah.
but I think that's the process one has to go through in order to arrive to a masterpiece, or maybe even appreciate
Yeah.
a masterpiece. You and I have been a part of many conversations where we would be done with it afterwards and we would tell each other and to ourselves, wow, this
Yeah.
was a conversation worth staying up for or
Yeah.
worth living for. So
That was
I
epic.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the whole journey of it all is practice makes better. I don't think practice makes perfect. I think it makes better, but I think you have to have courage to actually exercise the voice to create something.
So when that person asked you if you thought you were a narcissist,
Yeah.
were you like me, me?
I couldn't help but actually laugh at first, and then I started to think, and then the reason why I laughed, not to disrespect her or anything, but I think I laughed out of confusion because I never saw myself as someone who possessed narcissistic tendencies. But when I started to look into the different qualities of it, I mean, maybe, yeah, there, because how do you define all of these, right? The ability to receive feedback. I mean, what does that really mean? That's a very wide range. You might be able to receive feedback when it comes to some things, and you might not be able to receive feedback when it comes to other things.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, if the person is not your personal accountant, and they're teaching you things about how you should manage your
yeah,
finances, are you really going to receive their feedback
yeah, yeah,
when they haven't seen your bank account once?
yeah, yeah,
So is that, am I being a narcissist by not accepting
yeah,
that feedback?
yeah. Yeah, and understanding, as we've talked about before, that not everyone is for everyone else, and
Yeah.
that sometimes opinions, as we've talked about voices not being heard. Sometimes opinions don't need to be voiced, and
Mm.
so under what circumstances, Oleg, I simply must ask you: do you decide that you don't want your voice to be heard?
I think when I don't have experience, when I truly can't relate, and I was talking about this to someone else today. I had a call with one of the universities that I hopefully will get a chance to speak at, and we were talking about different topics that I could cover. And I told her just bluntly, I said, "Hey, these are the areas that I feel like I have insights and personal experience in. I don't have insights into what it's like to be an African American living in
Mhm,
United States or any other
mhm,
parts of the world.
mhm,
I can't relate. I haven't lived any
mhm,
parts of that journey. So situations where I don't have experience, I I try to not offer an opinion, and I literally will say I don't have an opinion.
mhm,
Now,
mhm.
that phrase alone took me many years to
Yeah,
understand and to practice.
yeah.
You know, there are certain political conversations or discussions. I don't have an opinion
Mhm,
because I don't know enough about it.
mhm,
I don't
mhm,
know enough about climate change and how to solve it.
mhm.
So what's me offering an opinion is just something that you and I can chew over. But I think there's, so the reason why I say I don't have an opinion and not choose to pursue by making up an opinion is because I think it creates more of a problem.
Mhm,
If I don't have any experience talking about a particular subject, and let's say you and I do converse over something, then in a way that becomes the truth that we go off of, right?
mhm,
So who knows what you're going to do with that truth after this
mhm.
conversation ends? Who knows who you're going to share that quote unquote truth with? And then who knows what they're going to do with that? We might make up a topic here, and then you turn to David and say, "Hey, did you know this?" And then David spreads it all over the world.
Yeah.
So it's like that's where I think information can become dangerous. That's where I think there is a difference between an opinion and a fact. Um, but at the same time, I think it takes a huge level of responsibility to share in, I guess you could say, an ethical manner.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's interesting because I my company employed
Mm,
or hired a vendor to help me with my branding
mm-hmm.
last year. And it's, by the way, for anyone who knows who I'm working with right now, it's not that person. It's another company. And that company um really did not behave, or at least
Mm,
one representative of that company did not behave in a way that I feel was ethical. And so I had a conversation about my contract with them, during which they agreed to let me out of it a little bit early.
mm,
And one of the things that I discussed with them was that I didn't feel comfortable associating with a company that did not behave in an ethical way, or at a minimum, that did not fulfill the promises that they committed to. And apologize. They didn't apologize when they didn't. In fact,
mm,
I found out the promise that they had made was one that they could not have fulfilled. So I had a problem with them. And when I spoke to them, they said, well, okay, we had a little bit of a discussion. They tried to keep me on, but they were like, okay, we will stop billing immediately. Thank you. Then a week later, I got billed by them for a not insignificant amount of money.
mm-hmm,
And I was furious because I felt that my voice had not been heard,
mm-hmm,
that the ethical lapse that I saw going on did silence my voice. Now, I made it clear that this sort of behavior would not be tolerated by me in the long run.
mm-hmm,
Or I don't know that I want to phrase it accurately. I reminded them during the course of my response to that there were areas that I could be very, very informative
mm-hmm.
to them around consequences of behaving unethically. And they did turn around and do the right thing and remove the billing that they, wrongfully did, even though they had said they were going to stop. But it went as to how one reacts to when their voice isn't heard. The
Mm-hmm.
first time during that first conversation, I felt, although I was angry at the misrepresentation that I had been given, when I was talking to them about it later, my voice was heard, as was evidenced by the fact that they were willing to withdraw. They were just basically willing to say, let's just end this relationship. But when I felt that my voice was not heard again by what ended up not being, a promise that they made that for whatever reason, I'm not even going to say, I'm not going to point
Mm-hmm.
a finger at them or anything. It sounds like it was unintentional when they finally talked to me. But
Mm-hmm.
what appeared in the moment to be like yet another failure to follow through on a promise.
Yeah.
I resorted to different tactics to make sure that my voice was heard, and my voice took on a very different tone. I think that they would agree. And one of what that story goes as to whether how we say something can
Mm-hmm.
impact whether we are heard or not. As another example, sometimes if I write an email and I include ESQ after my name,
Mm-hmm.
my voice seems to be heard very differently than if I'm just some standard random person asking for something.
Hmm.
Perhaps that goes as to power. Perhaps that goes as to fear. It
Mm-hmm.
also may be that I communicate differently once inside my mind I put myself in the vestments of that, the psychological vestments of that
Mm-hmm.
particular position. But have you ever had situations where you might have said the same or very, very similar things? Or where you've been in an ongoing set of circumstances where you felt your voice wasn't heard, and then all of a sudden you shifted the tone of your voice and had a
Mm-hmm.
different reaction?
Oh, absolutely. I can name you numerous situations where I shifted the tone of my voice, and I think due to the perception the other person had made, which made it seem like I was approaching the conversation through more of a aggressive tone.
Mm-hmm.
It changed the outcome. It made people a lot more responsive than they were before, and I
Mm-hmm.
think the reason why is because in my opinion, many people find it challenging to deal with conflict,
Hmm.
or many people try to avoid conflict. So when you change your tone, or when you make it seem like um, aggression is at the center of it, or for example, even in sending an email, right? You could send it with all proper punctuation, or you could send it all in caps. Same message, completely different story,
Yeah.
completely different response, completely different sense of urgency behind the message. If it's all in caps, it makes it seem like, you're screaming, you need an attention, you need the person to act right now,
Yeah.
versus if it's just a regular thing,
Yeah.
you're more likely to just view it as just any other message, and
Yeah.
you put it in your priority list, and whenever you get to it, that's when you get to it.
Yeah.
So I think aggression, when it's used, I think it changes something, and I think it has to do with the fact that some or many, whatever the number of people is, um, don't want to face conflict, don't want to deal with conflict. It's also cultural. For example, like being here, or having lived in Ghana for almost a month,
Hmm. Hard to believe, isn't it?
it really is. Um, People don't like conflict. It's just part of their culture. People
Mm-hmm.
actually avoid conflict
Mm-hmm.
situations.
Mm-hmm.
So, because, who knows what conflict is associated with? Conflict could be associated with violence. And when you go into cultures where maybe people don't choose to be verbally abusive or physically abusive,
Mm-hmm.
then they'll avoid those situations to begin with. So, when I raise my voice, and when I say, hey, you owe me this, or you said it was this amount, but it's that amount. You said you're going to finish the service in a day, but you finished it in 2 days. People are more likely to cater to your needs than they are to meet their needs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you ever use, and have you ever used aggression in your tone of voice as an adult?
Yeah, there were a couple of times where there were certain service. I remember one particular. It was a internet company. You might be a part of this same one, but let's not use their. Not list any names. There's one internet company. I was just moving into Austin, and I literally had like a very challenging experience in getting the internet set up, and actually getting bandwidth that was good. It seems to be slowing down every time, and then towards the end of the month, within, let's say, like 3 days, the third day towards the end of the month, it would slow down more. The second day, and then literally like the day before the bill was due, it was like non-existent. So it
Mm-hmm.
just didn't make sense to me that every month it was the same pattern. Like I could
Mm-hmm.
literally mark it on my calendar that every 27th of the month, this is what's going to happen: 28th, 29th, 30th, and then boom. So I used to get really frustrated about that. And I would call the company on the 27th, 28th, 29th, and I would ask them, I say, could you tell me what my internet speed is? And I would actually write these things down. And then I would call them at the beginning of each cycle, and I would ask them this question. I said, ma'am or sir, could you please help me explain what is happening? Every single month, this is the pattern. Why is it towards the end? Oh, it's the weather. No, it's sunny. There's no rain.
Right.
There's nothing. There's no power outages. There's nothing that's impacting it. It has to be something internal that's happening. Well, I never got a full answer, but I have learned from other people that some companies, maybe all companies, do that.
Mm-hmm.
They slow down your speed to make you upgrade. So yeah, long story longer, I ended up calling that company, and I remember just saying, like, I'm really tired of this service. I'm tired of wasting my time having to call every month to figure out what the speed is. So I just can't. Yeah, I canceled it. But before I canceled it, what's really interesting about some of the companies that I've worked with, and I don't know if you've experienced this or anyone else, but when you put pressure like that on them, when you say, "Hey, I've been a loyal customer, but I'm really not happy with the service anymore,"
Mm-hmm.
they will give you the most princess like treatment you'll ever receive. When you put pressure on them like that, saying, "Hey, I've been your internet subscriber for 10 years, and this year I'm just really not satisfied with the service. They will give you an upgrade
Mm-hmm.
because it's more, and I don't really fully understand this, and maybe you can help me explain this part. I don't understand why they value customer loyalty so much after that many years compared to the opportunity cost of just getting another customer. Why? Do you understand that? Because I don't.
I don't understand it. I mean, I understand it. Maybe that opportunity cost is what's compelling them to give you the upgrade. But what
But
I
why does
don't,
it seem like more challenging for them to let you go when really at the end of the day you're just like any other person, right?
yeah. I mean, I kind of feel that way, unless it's just pure, we want as many numbers as we can get.
Mm,
That has to be, that's the only explanation I can think
mm,
of. In the opportunity cost is actually coming into play every time they delay your service just
yeah,
to get you to upgrade, or every time there is an excuse for something, or every time you're on hold for 3 hours, or every time you ask for a repairman to come and they don't call you until 7 o'clock when they were supposed to be there by 4 o'clock that day. Those are all opportunity costs. If they were concerned about that, that they would be calculating, because the opportunity, the cost, the cost to you,
yeah,
the opportunity cost to you of dealing with that stuff, as opposed to doing the next most productive use of your time, is extraordinarily high,
yeah,
and it is incentivizing you to leave.
yeah. I've actually been a part of situations where, let's say, an electrician or whoever it might be, they would tell me, "Hey, we're gonna arrive at this hour," but they arrived like 2 or 3 hours later.
Yeah,
I've been in situations where I would call the company back and I say, "Hey, I literally waited 3 hours. Do
yeah,
you think it's fair for me to pay this price for the service?
yeah,
Do you think it's fair for me to pay the quoted price
yeah.
for it?" So, I think those are all, in my opinion, those are all fair questions to ask. If it's I I haven't found one thing in life that you can't negotiate on. And I think the same exact thing applies to these things. If the service is late, if the service is not performed well, if you're late, if all these things, why can't someone else negotiate on the value that's being received, right? Um, I still wish I can go to a grocery store and negotiate on the price of an apple. Those are a little bit more fixed. So my voice I don't think would be heard.
If you were offered money
Mm.
to never have your voice heard again, would you accept it?
No, because I think having the opportunity to use my voice, I think it's priceless. I think it's a priceless experience. I think your voice, if you're solely comparing it to money, I think it could make you more money that you could use in a lifetime. So I don't think money could buy that, in my opinion. And I think, I mean, think about it in having a voice and not having a voice. If you don't have a voice, how can you ever share your experience on this planet?
Mm-hmm.
How can
Mm-hmm.
you ever share what it meant for you or what it means for you to be alive? How can
Mm-hmm.
you ever share any of these things if you don't have a voice?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also, I don't know if it's a fundamental need to share with other people, but I know for a fact that I feel completely different when I get to share my experience with you or David or James or anyone else compared to not sharing it with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know? It's the same exact thing when we're talking about being lonely and being popular.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you live a life where you're lonely for the rest of your life? Would your life still have meaning
Mm-hmm.
if you had no interaction with an outside human?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're the
I
last
think the
human on
same thing is
planet.
with the voice. Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to say hello to David Pushkin. It's good to see you again. Thank you for joining. Thank you, as always, for a very substantive remark.
Hmm.
And I would say psychological safety plays a part in that, or plays a part in that conversational piece. Actually, that's a really good point we didn't touch on. And that is the importance of creating a space of psychological or other safety in order to have a voice. Now, I don't want to say that people will not have a voice in the absence of psychological safety. I think the entire civil rights movement in the United States, for instance, particularly in the South, where there was a lot of violence, indicates that people will find a way to have their voice even in the face of enormous personal risk.
Pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, but that being said, where there may not be a principle that is that big involved, or where there may not be that critical mass of people that are involved, what David is saying really, really is true. Like if it's your workplace, or if you're in a family situation where your voice isn't heard and you don't have psychological or physical safety because the person whose voice is shutting yours down is an abuser. That lack of safety is that's it. That shuts down the voice more than anything.
Yeah, I think that does play a role. I think having that, but I also wonder, in creating that psychological safety, do we all have a responsibility in that? Every single person that gets a chance to exercise their voice, do you have a responsibility in creating that psychological safety, whether it's conversation between you and I? This is a perfect example, right? You and I are able to meet virtual, in person, whichever way you want to put this.
Yeah.
Now, we don't see David, we don't see James, we don't see anyone else that chooses to tune in. Do we all have a responsibility to create that psychological safety? And what does that responsibility look like, considering that we're all tuning into this from completely different channels, right? They're tuning into this from more so like not a virtual world, but a comment-based world. So we can't see them, we can't see their body language, we can't see any of that. So do they carry a different responsibility than you and I carry when it comes to creating that psychological safety in a conversation?
I've got some thoughts about that. First of all, I want to say that any answer that I'm about to give has embedded within it the assumption that the human being that we're talking about has psychological or intellectual competence. I do not think a child, for instance, that doesn't even have a fully developed brain, or someone who is in a coma, or someone who is developmentally disabled, or someone who may be under torture, any of those sort of circumstances where the ability to think is not fully developed or compromised, no, I don't think those responsibilities can fairly be said to be there. But if you are an adult without a mental impairment, I actually think that if we say that people do not have the responsibility to hear their voice, then we are putting everything in danger that we would aspire to. Because no matter where we go, we're going to face opportunities to change our circumstance. So if we are adults that have full mental capacity. And an example that I'm thinking of is a situation in which you are with an abuser. It can be difficult to leave. I don't deny that, nor do I trivialize the struggles that a domestic violence victim may have with their psychology that limits their ability to be able to leave. But to say they have no agency traps them forever, and it defies their identity as adults. That infantilizes them in a way that I think is every bit as destructive. Well, maybe not as destructive as a physical abuse, but it is an attitude that maintains a power inequality within a relationship that is, to me, deeply problematic. If you are going to say, I don't have a choice. Hello, Melody. How are you? It's good to see you. Thank you for popping in. If you're not willing to say that I have agency, then you're always going to be stuck at the whim of your abuser.
Yeah.
Now, An extreme inverse example of that, though, and you see this with celebrities a lot. I don't have any responsibility. I'm just an
Mm,
entertainer. Why should I be held responsible for people that do exactly what I tell them to do? And I'm so glad to know that you're feeling better, Melody. Thank you. I've actually been thinking about you a lot. Mwah! There's a kiss.
mm,
And I am seeing, is it Emma
mm,
who is typing in? Is that the name? It looks like it's not
mhm,
in Arabic letters. But in any event, or in English alphabet. But in any event, I do also believe that as facilitators and leaders of any particular space,
mhm,
yes, we have a responsibility to create safety. Do we always do it? Of course not. That's human.
mhm,
Do you do it as a matter of pattern? That's a different story. And is it a matter of pattern that is leading to psychological violence or something that is antisocial with regards to that enterprise that you're involved in? If you are behaving in any of these ways, yes, you're responsible. And of course, the employees or whatever have the right to express their voice. And they do have, in my opinion, the obligation to the extent that they can realistically
mhm,
express their voice, even if it's by quitting. But let's not pretend in those circumstances that the obligations and the opportunity to accept responsibility are the same,
mhm,
because they're not. They're not, they're not, they're not. If you're an abusive boss, as opposed to the poor underling who's being treated like garbage and having their self esteem destroyed and may have 3 children at home that they're trying to feed, and it's the middle of a recession, so you don't know if you leave that you'll be able to get another job without starving your children. You do have agency and the responsibility to do something, to act.
mhm,
But your level of responsibility is by no means the same as that of the boss that's abusing you. Because
mhm,
unlike the underling, the boss can create that psychological safety that David Pushkin talked about earlier simply by modifying their behavior.
mhm,
Modifying behavior within the circumstance doesn't do anything for the abused underling. Celebrities, it's so, I'm going to go off a little bit because this disgusts me. The idea that you benefit from the fruits of society's abundance, money, acclaim, beautiful houses, nice cars, fancy this, fancy that, but you don't owe that same society anything, is to me sitting at the absolute bottom of the moral ladder.
mhm,
If you, and it's the same for those who say, well, I'm a tri-trillionaire. I don't owe taxes because I work too hard to get the money. You're benefiting from being part of a capitalistic system that rewards entrepreneurship or other high value offerings into the economy. But
mhm.
you only do that because other people are there contributing. You don't become a billionaire or something like that, right? By contributing, by having no one pay you for anything ever in your entire life. It
It's
just
true.
doesn't happen. And
Yeah.
so to say then, oh, I don't have a responsibility. I'll just reap the benefits of living in our society. But no, I don't have any obligation. That is antisocial.
Yeah.
Antisocial behavior is unethical.
Mhm. It's interesting that you bring that up because it makes me think of the connection between one's influence and the level of responsibility that they carry with that voice. Celebrities or entertainers in general, I've been thinking about this lately. To what degree do they have a responsibility when it comes to a lot of these things? Because, and we've seen this throughout history, right? Some people go on stage or wherever they might be, they say something that they quote unquote didn't mean, but they don't actually choose to take responsibility for it afterwards. And I think it's yeah, it's a slippery slope because in those cases some people have a very large reach.
Yeah.
Some people could change elections. Some celebrities could actually change election. some celebrities probably have changed elections, right?
Absolutely.
By saying certain things in
Hey,
certain ways.
Oprah endorsed Obama first. Think anyone would have paid
Hmm.
attention to him if Oprah hadn't pointed her finger at him? Melody, actually, you're right. People who are extremely wealthy have not made it themselves. And I'm not saying this as some liberal, an AOC clone, because I'm not. But
Yeah,
what I
it's a collective.
it's a
Yeah,
collective.
we all play a role in it
Exactly.
because without me purchasing the goods, you wouldn't
Yeah,
make money.
exactly. Totally. Or you just inherited it, which you did nothing to earn that except accident of birth, which
Yeah,
isn't
and
earning anything.
even in that case, if they were to inherit it, that money still had to come through the cycle, right?
Yeah.
So like someone had to offer the good, the other one had to purchase the goods. So I think the same way. I think a lot of these are um, very complex topics, and I think if anything, it's probably, I mean, much of the whole taxes situation is boiled conversations boiled down to numbers. Should
Yeah.
we pay this amount or should we pay that amount? I can't really I don't know. I don't have a solution to that because I'm not in their shoes, so I don't know where they're putting the money. I don't know what they're solving. I don't know what they need it for. I'm speaking from a completely different class
Hmm.
when it comes to them. But I think that yes, and anyone I think who has a platform, in my opinion, and I think the platform could be this. I think the platform could be at a grocery store. I think the platform could be whatever you're using your voice has a responsibility for how they're using that voice. I think.
There have been people that have requested to be on my podcast, and
Mm-hmm.
I ain't the same as Joe Rogan
Mm-hmm.
yet.
It's an important thing to voice there.
Exactly. I'm going to make sure my voice is heard around that. But even at my level, there have been people that have wanted to appear on the podcast that would superficially meet the themes of the show,
Mm,
but they're quacks. Or I felt that I would be endorsing them, even if I say I don't endorse this. Me
mm,
giving them a platform is endorsing their beliefs implicitly, or at least putting it out there to the world. And the reason why I mentioned quacks in particular, I don't want to be responsible for finding out that someone was advocating some BS solution to a medical problem and someone dies because of it. And that
mm.
they wouldn't have died if they didn't hear about it because of me. And I
Well,
set
I
a
think
high
there's a
standard
line.
for
I
myself
think there's a
proudly.
line there. I think there's a line though. To what degree do you choose to take on responsibility for another person's actions? So, for example, like if you were to accept a guest today, right, and off the bat the person checks off all the things,
Yeah.
but 10 days later they turn to be a serial killer,
Yeah.
do you still hold responsibility for that?
I don't believe that we are generally responsible for something that we didn't have a responsibility for. However, even that's
Mm,
qualified because the whole crime of manslaughter,
mm-hmm.
right, involves someone that didn't intentionally kill someone, but
Yeah.
they still died. There is, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here, but
Mm,
it's so that there's a full information. There is the famous Greek myth of Oedipus. Oedipus's father was a king, and he was told by an oracle that his son would kill him and then marry his wife. So his wife had a son, and he told a shepherd to take it out in the wilderness and just let this child be exposed. And that son, Oedipus, eventually somehow ended up being raised by the king and queen of another city state.
mm-hmm.
And they didn't tell Oedipus that they had adopted him, but he was aware of the prophecy. And
Mm-hmm.
so he didn't want to kill his father or marry his mother. So he left his adoptive parents' home. And on the way to the city where he was going, he met a man. They got into a fight at a crossroad and he killed him. And then
Mm,
he went to this town. I think it was the name of the city was Thebes. and the Sphinx was there. And the Sphinx was guarding it, and the Sphinx basically was asking people a riddle, and if they couldn't solve it, the Sphinx would tear them apart. So the Sphinx was keeping people from being able to enter or leave the city, and so they were dying because they couldn't do trade. And so Oedipus was asked as a riddle by the Sphinx. The Sphinx, he gave the right answer, and the Sphinx killed herself out of frustration, I guess. Kind of a little bit of an overreaction, but okay, that's how they were back then. And in any event, he is celebrated and given the title of king because the king had died and married the queen. It turns out this town, the city Thebes, was the city that he had originally been born in, that the man who he had the fight with on the corner going to Thebes was his father, and the queen that he married after killing the Sphinx was his mother. And so literally, eventually it all came out. His mother / wife, killed herself, and he took the brooches that she was wearing and put them in his eye and took them out. And so he was blind from then on as his punishment and was banished from the city forever. Now, what is that story about? There's a lot that story is about. But for the purposes of this conversation, it's about guilt for a very severe crime without ever knowing that you committed it. He was considered unclean by the people of Thebes because of the fact that he had committed patricide and married his mother. Oh, and they had children by. And so it's one of those things where there was a clear cultural imperative. It was acknowledged. And at the end of the whole epic cycle involving him, he's gained some sort of penitence. But it was acknowledged that he did not know what he was doing. But the crime still happened. And it needed to be atoned for. So even that, if it's not intentional, well, let's think about it for a minute. Did the Greeks have a point? Someone was still harmed.
Yeah, someone was still responsible.
Yeah, I still put this person on my show. And then he turns out to be a serial killer. And maybe he went on a date because someone listening or watching the show was like, oh my God, this seems like an amazing person. Jeffrey Dahmer, I think it was him, right? Was on the dating game and won in the 70s. Now, fortunately, that woman who won the date with him, later she said, oh, there was something really weird about him, so I refused to go on the date. But imagine if she had.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a tricky space we're in. Not you and I, but many other people as facilitators of these platforms, is because off the bat, the person could have the best possible appearance, could meet every single checklist that you have a checkbox for, but within a matter of time, they could turn out to be something different.
Yeah.
And I mean, people change, right? And some people change within a matter of hours, some people change within a matter of days, some people change within a matter of years. And you never know at what stage of someone else's change you're going to be at.
Yeah.
Some people are just starting their careers, and then once a year into their career, they could be a completely different person expressing completely different things.
Yeah.
I've definitely have been part of groups. I'm still part of groups like that, where a conversation I would have with someone however many years ago, it probably is a very different conversation that I have with them now, just due to the fact that we've been exposed to different types of information. So I don't know. I think, maybe going back to Melody's point, you could sit here and you could play the hypotheticals. You could play, well, what if I have this, and what if they turn into that? What if they say this, and what if it becomes that? Then, I think it could be a never-ending game. I think the danger of that is you may never actually act upon anything.
Right, we can't live without.
Hypothetically, anyone could be something.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that goes right. It could turn out, and by the way, it's not. But it could turn out that all these years, I'm a serial killer.
Yeah. Yeah, you can only use the knowledge you have now. 5 years later, you might experience a set of circumstances that are going to, I don't know, put you into a position where you might have to make some decisions that I might not agree with, right? 5 or 10 years later. But I have no way of knowing that now.
Yeah.
So,
Oleg, as
mhm,
we close out the evening,
mhm.
do you feel that being involved in a community like this one has amplified your voice being heard?
I think it has. I think it's also challenged my voice. I think it helped my voice develop even farther. Just being able to see other people's opinions and
Mm,
perspectives and know that, reaffirm myself that it's my way is not the way, it's just
yeah,
a way or one of many ways. I think that's one thing that I realized, and I think people like Melody and Jessica and James and David and so many other people
yeah,
who are part of this community who come in and take their time and actually stay through a whole conversation and contribute in ways, it helps me grow. It helps me expand my voice. It helps me learn things that I might have not known before. I think it's the only way to do it. I think it's the only way to come into this with an open mind and know that, hey, I don't know everything. I don't know how much I know, to be honest with you. I might not know much at all at the end of the day. I think I know a lot, but then all of a sudden I don't know how any of this even works.
yeah.
So other people's voices help me better understand my own. I think that's what's actually happening. But yeah, simultaneously, I think everyone's voice is being amplified, right? People who choose to join through comments, because from there, other people can connect with them around some of these shared perspectives. So I think I think it depends how you look at it. I think it could be looked at as a win-win for everyone that's a part of it.
Oftentimes, people who have different skills, abilities, ways of viewing the world
Mm,
have their voices shut down in our society. That's why
mm,
I think the work that our sponsor, Spectrum Designs, does is so important. For
mm-hmm,
anyone who is watching or listening who hasn't heard of Spectrum Designs, they printed the t shirts, these glorious things that Oleg and I
mm,
are wearing. They are the sponsor of this show. They are a t shirt manufacturing company, t shirt printing company, I should say, and apparel printing and embroidery company with a mission. They employ people on the autistic spectrum, and they provide real work opportunities for a population that often does not have their voice heard at all. We're going to see a little animated video about them. It's cute as heck, so be sure to sit through it. But before we get to that, and as we close out, Oleg, how can people find you? And
Where can
I
people
ain't going
find
to
me,
Ghana.
right? Where can people find me? No, people can find me through Overcoming Odds. That's the platform I've been building, or you and I have been a part of for quite some time.
Yes.
And really, what it's about for anyone, this is their first time tuning in, is a space for people to share the different obstacles they have been able to face in their lives, but also share what they've learned from them, and impact people through their stories. So people can go on there. We're in the process of putting together a summit, a virtual summit. It's going to be called Survive to Thrive, Face Your Fears. And actually, some of the people from this show will also be a part of it as well. So I'll make sure we release all the details there. But I know that that's not the only space my voice is heard. I know that there's also space that your voice could be heard on.
Yep. My podcast name is Purpose Highway, and you can find it at purposehighway.com. One of the voices that was heard, I believe the debut voice that was heard was yours,
Mm,
Oleg. And
mm,
it is quite an episode. It began the season, the entire series with a bang. We are talking about, at this point, about the change in spirituality, ethics, and
mm,
purpose that is coming with the decline of historical religious institutions within the West and other parts of the world, and interviewing people who either study it or are finding new pathways to connect with others in a world where the traditional connectors for meaning are disappearing. However,
mm,
within the next couple of months, this season will end. And I am very, very excited. I am tired tonight, not getting the words out of my mouth anywhere appropriately to the way.
Hey, at least you're still being heard.
Yeah,
Whatever you're saying,
being heard, sounding
obviously
like a
you
fool.
carry the responsibility, not me. But yeah,
That's totally. I hold myself totally responsible for that. But we're going to be changing themes to focus a little bit more on mythology as a lens for personal transformation, and the stories that we have about people who have dislodged toxic myths to ignite the charisma within, and then magnetize and monetize professional freedom are going to be beautiful indeed. Let's find out a little bit more about Spectrum, Oleg.
T-shirt. Yeah, let's show them.